Don't try to replicate it.
Good morning. Frank Watson here, meteorologist at the home of my parents' house, Bruce and Louise Watson. Here's the house that my dad flew out and bought in the summer of 1966. He actually arrived a few weeks before the rest of the family did. Then it was my older brother Bruce, myself, and my younger sister Valerie. We moved in that summer of 1966. My younger brother Ed, he would come a year later. But this is the house that he bought. It was actually a model home at the time. Otherwise, this whole area was a farm field, and we were one of the first houses to be built and move into. Otherwise, there was really no trees around. All the trees in the past 50 years have grown where people have planted them. And in that summer, we arrived, and then in September of 1966, my dad put up his weather station and started recording weather. In fact, the weather station's right over here. Let's go over there and take a look. At the time, there was no fences around, no trees. There was really no neighbors around. So everything you see has been moved in since 1966. In fact, there was kind of like a little bog area here. The guy in the back here, he has really nice, good soil, nice, rich and black. But a lot of this soil was scraped off, and most of the soil here is clay. So when it rains, it gets kind of mucky. We planted a Macintosh apple tree there, and it produces some really good tasting apples. We never sprayed it. It has a few worms in the apples, but otherwise the apples are really tasty. Here's the weather station. Let's go and take our last weather observation. Nothing really too special about it. No really high-tech gadgets or anything. But back then, my dad would take weather observations. He'd come out here maybe several times a day, and every night at midnight, religiously, and take weather observations because he always wanted to have a very accurate weather data set. In fact, he used this weather data not only for his own personal records, but also back then there was no state climate office. So he was often the one that the TV stations, the newspaper stations, the radio stations interviewed for weather data. And when the state climate office finally got started back in the mid-1970s, he donated a lot of his research and information that he had collected over the years and donated it to them. But basically, here's what we have. We have a high temperature thermometer, mercury. My dad was always insistent on using very accurate temperature recording devices, and as well as a mercury minimum temperature. And then we also had another sling psychrometer, which gave us the actual temperature. So my mom would come out after my dad passed away and take weather observations, but she's not the only one that would take weather observations. If my dad was ever out of town, us kids would take weather observations. And if the whole family was out of town, neighborhood kids would come over and take weather observations. The Odlins, who lived right over here, they would come over. Bob and Tom Odlin, and the Trombley girls, which lived across the street. There was 5 of them. Wendy and Debbie and Robin and Terry. And, well, I guess there was just 4. And they would come over and take weather observations for us also. When my dad passed away, our next door neighbor, Rita Speiss, she would take weather observations. Eventually, I installed some digital recordings. I really didn't want my mom coming out at midnight every night and take weather data recordings or measure the snow. So I set it up some automated temperatures, recording devices. But what we'll do, we'll mark the time. I think it's around 9:40 or so, write down the date. Look at the sky. Looks like we have some cirrus clouds. The wispy clouds up there. There's some altocumulus as well. It's a pretty nice day. We have a north wind. Temperature right now is around 73 degrees. And the humidity is a little high still. The dew point's around 70 degrees, upper 60s. One other thing that we have in the backyard is a rain gauge. Once again, nothing really too special. That's located right over here. My dad called this the Lake Region rain gauge. And back in the 1970s, he teamed up with Red Owl Stores, the grocery store, and he started a rain gauge network, which actually still is in operation today. It's called it's called a different name by now, but I always check. Looks like we have some morning dew that got kind of in there. We'll just kind of shake that out. And this can hold up to 11 inches of rain. It's only been really filled once back in 1986 when we had that big mega super rainstorm in the summer in July. Filled this baby up, set a lot of records here in the Twin Cities. So I'll write down no precip. There we go. But don't worry, folks. This may be the end of the Roseville Weather Observatory. As I said earlier, I'm a meteorologist, and I actually live in White Bear Lake, and I have my own weather shelter that's in operation. So even though this is 52 years of record keeping coming to an end here in Roseville, the Watson family is still on the job, and I'll be taking weather observations, which I have been, which seems like forever, and continue taking weather observations over in White Bear Lake, which I have been for the past 20-some years. So I don't know if I'll make 52 years like I did here in Roseville, but maybe there'll be somebody else to take over for us once we're gone. I want to thank you for joining me on this last weather app, and look to a lot of more future recordings, recording about the weather. And thanks for joining me in the backyard this morning. Please tell me you had the record button on.